alien told me. Not that I would volunteer such information, mind you, but you did ask. I did, I agreed, lifting another crate. That's really funny, honestly. What about them is disturbing? Murr twisted his blue-black tentacles in a way that looked anxious. Just the idea of something rigid inside your flesh, he said with a wiggly shudder. No matter how you move, it won't move with you, like your own body is fighting back. He wrapped his tentacles around a crate. I've had nightmares about stiffness like that. Wow, I said as I set my crate on top of the others. I'm sorry to hear that. All I can tell you is that bones aren't an enemy to us. They're something dependable and strong that hold us up and make everything possible. Murr shoved his crate into place. I suppose you'd need a positive relationship with your own disturbing parts, he said with a twitch of his hind tentacles that was probably the equivalent of shaking his head. Since a strong arm's pointy squid head was the majority of their body, they didn't seem to go in for human-style nods. Well, sure, same as you, I said, checking the hover cart for more crates. You know most humans find tentacles creepy, right? I have heard, he said with a smug little smile. No nods, but yes, smiles, with a mouth in the right place even. I was privately glad that he had a mouth on the front of his head, instead of hidden among his tentacles like an earth cephalopod. I was debating whether to tell him that when a crewmate of an entirely different body type walked in on clicking feet. I pointed at him. What about exoskeletons? I asked Murr. Z stopped beside the cart. What about exoskeletons? He demanded. He struck a pose out of an intergalactic fashion show, letting the ship's lights play on his vivid purple carapace while he snapped his pincher arms. Are you squishies jealous? Sure, let's go with that, Murr told him, before turning to me. Exoskeletons are different from bones. They're like an exosuit, a protective case for the natural softness. G held the pose. A glorious one? Yes, Z. You're very pretty. Murr sounded more than a little patronizing, but G didn't seem to mind. That is the proper amount of respect, the bug alien said. He relaxed to grasp the cart handles with his pinchers and towed it out of the room. I will return with more freeze-dried foodstuffs. Make sure you tie those crates down. Yeah, we've got it, Murr told him. Make sure you get the right ones. 2 of the 3 shipments look similar. This is obvious to one with such excellent color vision as myself. Murr made the little popping noises that pass for laughter and turned toward the adjustable netting. He threw one end to me. We spent the next few minutes fastening things down to industry standards, which still seemed a little excessive. I'd never seen the ship's anti-gravity fail yet, but I supposed meteor impacts were possible. Some of those buggers were much faster than I'd ever expected before I got into space. We're going to need a replacement for this one, Murr said, fingering a hole in one net. Does it count as fingering if he used a tentacle tip? Tentacling just doesn't sound right. He set it aside near the door. Do we have enough for now? I asked. Yeah, probably, he said. We just can't forget on the next restocking trip. Hey, Paint, he called after someone who just passed the doorway. Paint, she said, replying with her own name where I would have said yes or what. Her full name was Painted Sunset, but since that sounded way too much like the captain's name, Piercing Sunlight, she just stuck to Paint. She poked her snout of mottled orange scales around the doorframe, all polite curiosity. Can you put another net on the shopping list? Murr asked. Big or small? Big, please.
Our soldiers completely disabled this unit in the field. What we're hearing is merely a byproduct of electrical impulses. I assure you, it is well past the point of feeling pain.
I'll take your word for it, Doctor.
I'm sending you a new sequence now.
These are coordinates. Return coordinates. Think we've got a point of origin. Well, part of one.
Something else. Something underneath. One more. The unit is attempting to block further access.
That's not all it's doing. I'm losing the data we've already decrypted.
Almost there. Just one more adjustment.
Forget the data. It's accessing
some sort of fail-safe protocol, I imagine. The Codex must have intentionally overloaded the interface to prevent any further theft of information. Still, I believe I was one step ahead of it.
That's an enormous amount of data.
Yes, and I expect it may take some time to decipher.
Better get started. I don't think we're gonna be able to do that again.
I'll proceed with the necessary research and preparation. With your approval, of course, Commander. I'd also suggest we look into those coordinates.
That's if I can reconstruct the data we lost in the transfer. Just hope it was worth it.
Got it. That sounded way too much like the captain's name, Piercing Sunlight. She just stuck to paint. She poked her snout of mottled orange scales around the door frame, all polite curiosity. Can you put another net on the shopping list? Mur asked. Big or small? Big, please. Got it. One question for you. What's that? Mur asked. Paint spun to stick her tail out into the doorway. She had something taped to it. A stapler? Whatever it was, it clacked like a tiny crocodile when she moved. Have you seen any tasty fish around here? She said in a growly voice. Rawr! With a long-suffering sigh, Mur told her, No, but there are probably some in the kitchen. Thanks. Paint spun again and stuck her head out. Was it scary? I think it needs eyes to be really scary. Mur sighed. That was good, I said. Eyes would be better. Hey, do you have access to googly eyes out here? The little sticky ones? No, what are those? Paint asked, walking into the room. They sound fun. They are, I told her. I used to like putting two on my hand and making a little face like this. I demonstrated, wrapping a forefinger around my thumb and moving both together like a talking mouth. Hello, I don't have teeth. Paint thought this was the best thing ever, and despite Mur's eye-rolling maturity, he couldn't take his eyes off the display. That is unsettlingly convincing, he admitted, even without eyes. If I saw that sneak around a corner and start talking to me, I'd believe we had a stowaway of a species I'd never seen before. He pointed 3 tentacles at my face. Do not do that as a prank, or I'll throw your shoes out the airlock. I know you treasure those. It's not that I treasure them, I said. The floor is just cold without them, and I could step on something sharp. Yeah, so? That's life, the squid-like alien said. You don't see me wearing an exosuit about the ship just because the floor is cold. Hey, do that hand thing one more time, Paint said. I think I've almost got it. Her scaly orange fingers were too short to manage the same effect, but she was trying. More crates, announced G from the hallway. Make some emptiness. The 3 of us moved aside for him to direct the hover cart into place. Paint gushed about the hand thing. It looks so convincing. I can't do it right. Show him. I did, feeling a bit silly in front of his unblinking, massive eyes. His antennae held still, making his expression hard to read. Hello, I said. I'm a mouth. That's not a mouth, he declared. Before I could say, yeah, that's the point, he stepped back from the cart. With a flourish, he tucked his head low against his shoulders and bent his pincher arms into a terrifying facsimile of a gaping jaw lined with teeth. Paint squeaked. Mur slapped a tentacle against the floor. Wow, I said. Yeah, googly eyes have nothing on that. Mur pointed at him. I see you also have a potential prank that you should not pull. At the same time, Paint exclaimed, You have to show sunlight! Mur gave her a look. Do not terrify the captain. No, she'll love it. I'm pretty sure she's busy. Paint rubbed her chin as G resumed a normal posture. It wouldn't take long, but yeah, she's busy. Dinner time? Oh, and you have to show off your thing too, she said, pointing at me. Mur started to naysay, but I said, Oh, like a talent show? I have all of the talent, G announced. Paint was delighted. Mur waved his tentacles about and went back to work, while G launched into a story of the time he scared off a predator with the false jaws trick. Come on, let's tell everybody else about the talent show, Paint said. This'll be great! She waved for G to follow her, and he went, still talking. Mur grumbled. Dinner is going to be interesting. I hope it doesn't put anyone off their food. I'll try not to do anything bone-related, I said. I appreciate the restraint. After a moment of handling crates, I asked, "Did you know our blood is made inside our bones?" "Oh, that is so much worse. I may just get sick ahead of time."
"I never tire of such a spectacular view," a gentle voice said with a broad, pleased smile on her lips. "Orichalcum is beautiful, isn't it? Call me biased, but I find it more beautiful than dawn and earth," she said, as she stared lovingly at the bluish opal planet floating in the void so peacefully. "A home is always the most beautiful sight for the heart. I understand your sentiment, Catherine." Catherine nodded in reply while her entire body shuddered as the musical notes and harmonic beauty that could only belong to the Koshi were translated into English in her head. While it was impossible to give the vibrations and subtle rhythmic pulses of the Koshi an authentic human voice, the translator always gave them a suave, elegant tone that fit them perfectly. Turning around, she saw her fellow diplomat, a Koshi, a floating, polished, smooth blue crystal with a rainbow pattern on top of it constantly shifting, always moving and only increasing in intensity whenever it sang. There were smaller floating crystals around the main body, forming 8 manipulators similar to hands with only 3 fingers. "You're right, V. When was the last time we had such tranquility? When was the last time we could meet and greet without fearing repercussions?" Catherine asked, shook her head, and waved her hand dismissingly. "Forget I said anything. Or your words may be interpreted as gloating?" V remarked with a teasing tone, the prismatic light on top of its main body shifting and swirling with the grace of the finest harp player, making the strings dance beneath their fingers. "I am aware of your constant objections towards the League of Associated Empires. That reminds me, thank you for that precious gift. It was most enjoyable." Catherine smiled. "Hey, I had to celebrate somehow, right? But I swear that finding suitable gifts for you Koashis is harder than finding a good gift for my mother." She sighed tiredly. "Though, am I that transparent? I thought I did a good job hiding how happy I was when the United Systems formally withdrew their association from the League. Bunch of dim-witted pricks, all of them." The colors of V swirled agitatedly as it sang. "I and my people argue that your decision was foolish, my friend. The sanctions you received were undeserved. Dozens of protests sparking across your worlds. All because of us." "Oh, stop it, you lump of rocks." Catherine rolled her eyes. "Yeah, even I have to admit that our withdrawal hurt a bit more than we calculated, but nothing we couldn't handle. 3 years have passed, and now our economy is back on track. Infrastructure programs are springing everywhere, mining operations, and so much more. The one thing I do regret is that the League no longer allows human vessels to traverse through its territory." Her cheery, laid-back tone shifted to a darker, somber one, her eyes moving to her homeworld for a few seconds before returning to V. "Though, after the recording, I don't blame them all that much for blocking all communications. Children always make mistakes. Adults make mistakes. Elderly make mistakes. However, we always learn from them. We always must strive for betterment. Humanity has made mistakes, and so have the Koshi, the League, and all those that live. The only fools are those that refuse to learn," V replied, its colors swirling and vibrating warmly. "True enough," Catherine said. After a few seconds of contemplative silence, she shook her head. "Let's focus on other things, V. First and foremost, are our guests arriving soon?" "They should be here any moment now," V replied. "Catherine, I must ask you something rather personal. May I?" "Sure, buddy. Fire!" Catherine replied, intrigued about what her old friend and work partner could want to know. "This question is not coming from my government, but rather from my own mind. Tell me, Catherine, do you think this is a wise idea?" Catherine blinked, her brown eyes staring at her friend before she ran her hands over her short black hair. "Honestly, I don't know. But if we don't try or back down now, then what's the point? Humanity was lonely for so long, dreaming to seek more, know more, and meet others across the stars. And when we did, we acted like the ignorant, stupid monkeys we always feared to be seen as," she said, closing her eyes. "I know that we only reacted in fear and anger. No, that's nothing more than an excuse. We could have been better. We should have been better." "My friend," V interjected when Catherine clenched her hands into shaky fists. "Humanity has proven that you are better than your bloody past. Enlightenment doesn't come without struggle. And although the losses and the suffering are regrettable, they are steps that must be taken." Catherine chuckled, her eyes shining brightly as she stared at her friend. "The League and their laws of life surely didn't account for the wisdom of your people, V." With a loud nasal exhale, she pulled up a tablet and began to file through it. Silently, V did the same, four surprisingly dexterous arms interacting with the tablet resting before him on the desk. For several minutes, the dupe waited in silence, checking, reviewing, and making sure everything they had was in order, until a soft chime rang across the ample, grayish-opal room, housing nothing more than a large, semicircular table in the middle, a few select plants, and a shelf filled with books. Catherine froze for a second, then reached to her right ear. "Have our guests arrived?" "They have," came the reply, respectful and polite. "Send them in," she ordered, and set the tablet aside. V followed suit while its vibrant colors shifted up and down. "Nervous?" "One can only plan so much before the time to act comes. Yes, Catherine, I am nervous," V replied, its main body leaning from side to show humor. Catherine wanted to giggle at that, but managed to keep it together. Wisely done, as the doors opened up to reveal 6 armed humans entering the room and forming a cordial reception. A 7th human, a meek-looking blonde woman, entered confidently into the room with a friendly, welcoming expression on her face. "Please, this way." The seasoned diplomat stood up a moment before the first being the blonde had escorted entered the room. No matter how many times she saw a Joel, Catherine couldn't help but to be in awe of them. They looked like they had a collection of vines tangled together for feet, or rather a meter-wide stump that wriggled constantly as she moved with surprising speed. Further up, a splintered stalk made out of those same vines rose up, moving from side to side gently and elegantly until reaching around 4 meters high, where the vines smoothed out and separated into right different parts. 6 of those vines rested and dangled at the sides of Joel's body and acted as tentacles or manipulators. The remaining 2 bloomed into a flower similar to that of a sunflower, but far more vibrant, lively, and with dozens of small stalks willing at the center of it. Above the stalks, 16 small, beady black, unblinking eyes stood. The petals of the flower flowed behind and down the center, acting more like hair than any flower found on Earth and her sibling worlds. The Joel always smelled nice, earthy in a way, were surprisingly strong for their spindly yet imposing forms would suggest, and their soft, warm colors of green, brown, yellow, orange, and violet mixing and matching their petals and manipulator vines were always pleasing to human eyes. Behind the Joel came the Fairgies. While standing at a mere meter tall, the 4-legged, 4-armed, centaur-like mix of a raccoon and a falcon walked with a precision that was uncanny. The drone was furless, with a squishy aquamarine skin, a curved beak at the front of its head, 4 vibrant yellow eyes constantly blinking with side eyelids. Its head wasn't too big but was smooth and nicely shaped for something that could attack in a burst of motion. Claws adorned the 4-fingered toes of each foot, short but sharp, while the 4 manipulators, also sharing 4 fingers, lacked claws in favor of digits not too dissimilar to that of human fingers, but each finger could act as a thumb at any given moment, and all that paled in comparison to their psychic hive mind. In truth, every Fairgies was just an extension of a singular intelligence. In essence, the Fairgies wasn't so much a species and rather just one individual that controlled billions of bodies at the same time and could divide its attention as little or as much as it desired. Behind the small Fairgies came a floating bubble with a purple-orange mist swirling inside it. The bubble was completely sealed and transparent, having nothing more than suspender emitters below it and at the sides for stabilization, and a set of twin panels that connected the inside with the outside to allow for communication. Inside, the moving, flowing gas moved and reformed itself into a human drawn straight from memory by a drunk blind man. The head was nothing more than an elongated skull, disproportionate limbs, and a wide, unnerving smile plastered on the face of the Zoof. Finally, a 3-meter-tall insectoid creature followed the Zoof, making sure to give everyone a wide berth. The face of the Quaoos was something that during first contact, humanity called in unison nightmare fuel. 5 rhombus eyes ordered in a semicircle looked intently with eerie yellow light, with a single red dot in the middle that moved independently of the other eyes. Beneath the eyes, 2 slits signaled nostrils, and directly beneath it, a permanent smile filled with dark fangs. At the sides of his head, several protrusions that resembled horns, but were in truth semi-flexible tentacles, with the exception of 2 thinner ones that acted as his cheeks, similar in form to chelicerae. The rest of his body was dense and heavily packed with muscles below a titanium-hard, dim red exoskeleton, yet he was lean for a Quao-Oz. 2 large, strong arms extended from the creature's shoulders, while another 2 smaller arms extended from the sides of his torso. Behind him, a thin, elongated abdomen extended as it slowly became thinner until it tipped out with a stinger. Finally, double-jointed, long, strong legs supported the absurdly strong being that, despite its appearance, looked rather skittish and self-conscious of his immense strength, and how dangerous he really was to anything that wasn't his own species. Catherine bowed slightly after the Quao-Oz came to a halt a couple of meters behind the rest of the new arrivals. I welcome you to Orichalcum and to the Central Diplomatic Station of the United Systems, my friends. I hope your journeys were comfortable. Yes, pleased. Delicious microbiological supplements. Enjoyable field. Humbled by Bubble. The Zoof was the first to reply, its body moving and appearance shifting as it tried to mimic human movements with little success. I am intrigued by your proposal. Thus I have come with this drone, Fergus said in a dull, emotionless tone. It shows my interest, yes? Shall we proceed? The Joel shuddered, the stalks moving, and soon the translators spoke up. I agree with Fergus. My people are puzzled by this proposal. Must inquire what the benefits could mean, what dangers lurk in deep soils. We are happy to come. The deep, dark, and slightly booming voice of the Quao-Oz sounded next. I am happy to answer the call of our human and Koshi friends. Only benefits and further friendship can follow this delightful summon. Dear ambassadors and Ferges, please, I urge you to take your designated seats so we may begin. V sang. Seconds later, the 4 guests took their positions around the table. Only then did it turn to the human guards and the escort. You may leave us. Thank you with light and harmony for your services. The 7 humans nodded and left the room, leaving the 6 different beings inside. Allow me to start with a conjecture, yes? The Joel said. If nobody objects, then you may do so, Ambassador Gick, Catherine said, her jovial, easygoing attitude replaced by trained professionalism. A few seconds of silence later, she nodded. Gick waved her vines in agreement. Thank you for this honor, fellow ambassadors and diplomats gathered here today. After receiving this proposal, the High Philosophical Council pondered endlessly what this could mean. I bring a question that comes from their stalks and is voiced through mine. Are you seeking conflict with the League? Cynthia shook her head. No, that is, in fact, farthest from the truth. We do not wish to antagonize the League of Associated Empires. Our goal is peace, not conflict, never war. Yes. Previous interactions between our peoples point to such a noble outcome. Their question has been uttered, and I have heard the answer. Please proceed, Geek said, her vines visibly relaxing. In that case, I shall make another direct question. Human Koshi, do you wish to integrate with me? If so, I must disappoint you. I cannot subjugate others into my fold. I offer many apologies, for I do not wish to insult, but the chaos of your individuality would poison me even if I could join my vastness, Fergus said in an apologetic, sincere tone. As tempting and intriguing as a union with your great being sounds, Fergus, we do not seek to assimilate anyone nor be assimilated. Why break the harmonics and the wonderful music we all produce in our own ways? V replied. Odd. We offer little. Not rich, not great, lack flesh, lack your advantages, honor, humbled, to be seen as equals, inquiry. Why do this? What benefit expected? The Zoof asked. Ambassador Doug, we are more than aware that you rely on our help to move between your colonies. However, you speak falsehoods. While it is true that your economy and priorities are unlike what we normally use, you have your own advantages. You can explore where we cannot. Investigate and research fields with laughable ease, whilst to us they are short of torture, Catherine replied. To everyone's surprise, rasping, clicking, nervous noises caught their attention. All eyes turned to the Quaoos as it fidgeted by clicking his claw-tipped tentacles against each other, his face or the back of his head. "Is something the matter, Ambassador Ulzut?" We are not going to hurt anyone, right? My people do not wish to harm others. All of us know of the way most others see my people. They are right. We are dangerous. But we do not wish to hurt our friends. This proposal fills us with joy. I have come to bear the message of our Empress. We accept. To finally embrace our siblings from beyond the stars is the dream of my people. But we simply do not wish to bring pain to others. Is this fine? A noble heart is a noble soul. We've taken precautions and have agreed that if the League sees us as a danger, we will take measures to ensure peace. Sweet harmonics and rhythms of a conjoined existence on separate chords, V replied. Mutual defense, mutual understanding, mutual advancement. However, our ways and economies are different. There will be issues and problems to face. I do not wish to sacrifice many of my bodies in such an unsure journey. Fairgis clicked, his version of a hum. To that I say this. Is this not the next logical step? Already we have great access and communication between each other. As long as conflict is not desired, we are in agreement. If the path before you is riddled with thorns and pits, do you search for another way that may lead you astray or surge forth and traverse the difficulties knowing the richest plains are waiting for you? Gik questioned, her entire body wriggling. Laughter! 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 Doug chanted over and over as its body fragmented and swirled constantly. We agree, not blind. Reunion equal sign formality, safety, peace, friends, intriguing, intriguing, intriguing. Ulzut chittered loudly. Is this really happening? Is this true? If this is a dream, please do not wake me up, he said whilst Fairgis chirped in agreement. Catherine turned to V, to which her friend moved two of its manipulators in the common human gesture of thumbs up. In that case, our reunion can begin in full. Tapping on her tablet, a wide holographic display appeared in front of the table so that everyone could see it without issues. We'll need a name, she smirked. V's colors swirled, shifted, and danced wildly. Let our singular chorus join into an orchestra that even the void shall hear. Laji blinked, his membrane displaying his confusion. Could you repeat that again? He asked the small bipedal avian Choxy, his personal assistant. The Choxy fluttered before speaking up. The humans, the Koshi, the Fergis, the Zoof, the Joel, and the Quaoos have announced that they have joined together in a new federation. Laji felt weak for a moment before he turned to the painting his friend Aaron had gifted him before the humans withdrew their League membership years ago, and the denouncement of the League after the recording was revealed and heard by the entire council. For a moment he felt fear and his membrane reflected it, but only for a second. Fear soon transformed into confusion, and finally confusion gave way to pragmatism. Did they send any message at all to the League? Only one, we are not enemies. Let's live in peace. Nothing follows. Looking up at the Chancellor, she dared to speak up. What is going to happen now? Laji stood up and made his way to the painting, his fingers tracing against the protective glass, keeping the precious, gorgeous handmade illustration. A few seconds later, he replied, I wouldn't worry too much about it. I believe that their message is sincere, not a threat or something nefarious. Turning to his assistant, he asked, out of curiosity, what's the name of their federation? The Alliance of Monsters.
For countless eons we traveled among the stars. We set root upon on world after world and encountered thousands of sentient races. Some were very much like ourselves. Others were terrifyingly alien at first. The sufficiently evolved ones we greeted as equals. The primitives we harmonized and uplifted, but always on our terms. 1,000 races paid us tribute. The pulse of life itself resonated with our will, and then we encountered the silent ones. On the third world of a feeble sun, one of our spore ships discovered hemispheres spanning hives of stone, the likes of which we had never seen. We snatched its inhabitants and examined them with great curiosity. We ran every manner of test we could conceive, all the while scarcely believing the hairless vertebrate's capacity for intelligence. Our confusion was understandable. On countless inhabited worlds, we saw the same evolutionary advance arise time after time. Through the billion convergences of random chance, a dominant race reaches a threshold of intelligence. With it comes sentience, empathy, and species-wide consensus. The race expands across the planet, unified in thought and action, and reaches an optimal equilibrium with their environment. Gifted with their increased understanding of their own evolutionary biology and that of their surrounding biosphere, they begin to direct evolution to their own ends. In 2 or 3 long cycles, their advances culminate in the breeding of migratory bionts to take them beyond their terrestrial cradle. There, with nothing but the void around them, their newly accustomed senses hear the first echoes of the pulse that spans the stars, and so they would cast away the limits of time and distance and take their place among the galactic community. Often we would find a species before they reached this point. We would speed along their evolutionary development, harmonize their emergent group mind a little closer to our own, and so very soon in the greater scheme of things, another friendly race among the stars would be reciprocating just a little more than necessary to show their appreciation for our guidance. Some of the elder races questioned the wisdom of our actions, but the relationships between us and our uplifts were always mutually beneficial. We were very good at what we did. Yet against all odds, these humans had come to dominate their planet without ever developing true empathy. They possessed a vestigial echo of it that allowed them to guess the thoughts and emotions of others based on visual and auditory cues. It was also how they communicated. They flailed their appendages and vibrated the air like unevolved beasts in mating season, and somehow a semblance of meaning is passed between them. Such rudimentary information exchange was not nearly enough to wean them from their predatory instincts. They were disorganized, chaotic, unevolved, and terminated each other with little regard. By the time we found them, they had tamed the entire surface of their planet without ever arriving at a way to avoid the catastrophic collapse that awaited at the end of their own exponential growth. Indeed, due to the unique evolutionary dead end in which they found themselves, the race as a whole never developed anything beyond the most rudimentary mastery over their biosphere. They still perished to disease and accidents as often as intentional violence or self-termination. Whole segments of their hives languished in infirmity. To make up for their shortfalls, they instead developed a unique art of assembly. It was a directed method of construction without the use or creation of bionts. They built devices for every conceivable purpose, using nothing but the materials of their environment. With nary a fusion bladder in sight, they had flung themselves into near orbit atop metal tubes of volatile chemicals. Without us, the secret of pulse travel would have been forever denied to them. But to us, they had already achieved the inconceivable. By all analysis, such a race should have driven themselves into extinction long ago. Yet here they were. We could deny their intelligence no longer. Despite their vulgar peculiarities, the ingenuity of their race was unrivaled. Our greed overwhelmed our reason. We began to uplift the humans. Our initial contact was troubled. Unable to determine their fluid hierarchies, we simply rooted our landers in their densest hive clusters and waited for their current leaders to present themselves. When they instead responded with panicked violence, we were forced to defend ourselves and hybridize a generation of emissaries to spreading our message of cooperation. When humanity finally understood our intentions, they turned to violence once more, not towards us, but against each other. They fought with absolute conviction that our gifts would only be given to the few. We spent 26 short cycles pacifying and uplifting the humans, over 5 times longer than any previous race. But ultimately we succeeded. The humans largely abandoned their own sciences and took to the evolutionary arts with vigor. They never adopted a race-spanning group mind, but localized empathy symbiote swarms allowed them to coexist in harmony as never before. No longer bound by the speed of light, they rode the pulse and quickly spread beyond their local star cluster. In their gratitude, they gifted us with so many optimized habitats that our race was pulled into a new golden age of expansion, exceeding even our greatest expectations. However briefly, humans added their voice to the pulse of life, and we were all the richer for it. The golden age would not last. The first hints of trouble rippled through the pulse from the border between the human and Vree space. The rest of the civilized races had long ago decided to give a wide berth to the isolationist Vree. After conceding colonies of our own to them on more than one occasion, there was certainly no fondness between our two races. We predicted their retaliatory strikes against human habitats 55 short cycles in advance, but we downplayed the dangers to our trusting allies. Their expansion progressed apace. Why the Vree chose to unleash their full fury on this occasion, we will never know. Swarms of subverters simultaneously hijacked hundreds of human ships. Seeker tendrils disabled hulls and forcibly bonded with the helpless crew. Psychic nodes spliced unspeakable terrors directly into their prisoners' thoughts, then cast those fear-maddened minds into the pulse to call out to their doomed homeworlds. Any unified race would have been paralyzed by the assault, at least temporarily. The humans in their dispersed collectives were initially not as hard hit, but that same diffusion prevented them from forming a united response against the Vree psychic assault. Trillions died or were driven mad. In half a short cycle, entire systems were wiped clean of human life. The surviving humans severed themselves from the pulse. While they still lived and acted in some semblance of unity, whatever was left of their empathy webs were dismantled. Every human reverted to a solitary mind, deafened to tormented screams of their brethren. Once more they became the silent ones. The sentient races were alarmed by the scale of Vree aggression. We assembled a massive relief swarm in just under 2 short cycles, an endeavor of unprecedented haste. Yet before the swarm launched, the Vree reached out to us. The humans retaliated against the Vree with a war of extermination. Every asset they possessed they poured into the conflict. Finding themselves outmatched by Vree Beyonce, the humans revived their old sciences. From 1,000 fronts, their unliving husks of metal and gas tore through the pulse and rained destruction upon the Vree. When the Vree viroformed their worlds, the humans moved their colonies deeper into space. The humans did not fight for gain. They took only what resources they needed to advance and destroyed the rest, simply to deny their enemy. Against unliving ships crewed by unlinked minds, the Vree faced an enemy they could not subvert. The horrors inflicted upon the humans were repaid 100-fold. The Vree tried to sue for peace, even to admit defeat, but faced with no counterpart in the pulse, they did not even know how to surrender. Their once great dominion was reduced to a mere 3 systems. The survivors were begging for their lives. They did not have a chance to beg for long. The Vree no longer exist in the galaxy. Neither do the Zuya, the K-Hives, the Miminin, or the hundreds of other races who foolishly decided to turn the swarm of salvation into a swarm of containment. Whether by prudence or cowardice, we departed from the swarm. The others did not study the humans as we did. They did not understand how an evolved species could wage a war of genocide, and perhaps in our greed, we did not want them to. The final war was long and bitter. The humans seized every advantage and overcame every hardship. In their desperation, the remaining races synchronized their minds and all but deafened the pulse. The humans were not deterred. They sent their ships across the void between stars, accelerating to such tremendous...
Attached the shadow chamber directly into the ship's computer. It's been sifting through the material we've recovered non-stop since our return, cataloging sequences.
Genetic sequences in near infinite combination, yet all bearing similar genetic markers. Human markers. There must be thousands of them. Tens of thousands. And the procedure is still nowhere near complete.
Which is why we need the ship's computer to find out where they came from, by cross-referencing them with the data we've managed to hack from the Advent network. It's an admission file from one of the gene therapy clinics.
Avatar. Just what exactly is in that vial?
In my worst nightmares, I would never have imagined.
Doctor.
I believe we have found the missing civilians.
That's impossible.
The gene clinics. Millions of people just looking for help.
Medically screened and been selected. Suitable candidates taken to that contemptible facility to be processed, refined into the material we now possess.
But why do this?
I could not begin to fathom a guess at this point. There exists no research that would ever warrant this.
It's genocide, Doctor. And these people are walking right into it. We may not know what they're doing with this stuff, but I think I can find out where it's going. Got it. It's a high-security production facility. Standard defensive complement.
Then I strongly suggest we pay them a visit, Commander.
Agreed. The information we gain could prove invaluable towards stopping the aliens' true agenda.
Seized every advantage and overcame every hardship. In their desperation, the remaining races synchronized their minds and all but deafened the pulse. The humans were not deterred. They sent their ships across the void between stars, accelerating to such tremendous velocities that time did not move even as they moved. From a single rotation to 100 great cycles, the human ships still reached their targets. Some arrived as impact-marred husks crewed by same hairless vertebrates we first encountered. Other later creations appeared more alien to the old humans than the enemies they faced. The TG of Apex Moon were the last to defy the humans. They awoke the slumbering unconscious of their entire biosphere and turned it into a weapon. They bled the essence of the pulse into the empty void, twisting the fabric of space itself until it was anathema to all life. The humans braved their system regardless. They were broken by the millions while they built the great web around that blue-white star. At least we think the light of the TG home star was blue-white before it was dimmed forever. It was all so long ago. We are the custodians of the feeble and the dead. Our song alone echoes through the pulse. The humans have long ago ceased to claim terrestrial worlds. We still encounter their ships from time to time, inscrutable geometries surrounded by clouds of automata no larger than a cell. They let us be, but to any other spacefaring race they find, they are not so kind. Too late did we understand their true nature. Humanity is a virus. Like any virus to a sufficiently advanced species, they were harmless, even exploitable. But through our callous actions, we threw them into an evolutionary cauldron that saw their worlds obliterated, along with the most peaceful members of their species. Only the most aggressive and dangerous combat strains survived, fully adapted to survive and conquer in any environment. Humans have become the perfect virus against which there can be no defense. We too have ceased our old habits. We no longer meddle in the evolution of primitive species we encounter, but sometime soon, due to no meddling on our part, your race will discover your empathic gift and look up to the stars together. When that time comes, please heed our warning. The stars are not for you. Do not enter the pulse. It is forbidden. Emperor Rolnar marched through the ash-choked streets of what was once Earth, flanked by hundreds of security agents and support personnel. They marched in unison towards the last building left non-decimated in this desecrated world. Bodies, blood, and gore were ever present, filling in craters, dips, and depressions like a sick biological concrete. Death was everywhere on this once mighty world, yet how it came to be is a story what remains of the galaxy would rather leave unheard. In the year 2796, first contact with a bipedal race of omnivores was made in orbit of Icarus 1b 172, a red supergiant star under close study due to its high probability of exploding in a supernova within a standard cycle. They were in an overlooked part of the galaxy and thus had stayed under our radar for quite some time. Yet in this time they had advanced into a powerful interstellar empire. These bipedal omnivores would end up being humans. They had sent a scientific research vessel to this system, much like we had, in hopes of studying the last moments of a dying star. This star was known to them as Betelgeuse, a very culturally significant star in one of their most prominent constellations. The star was set to explode in one human month, and the researchers of both parties were more interested in the star than each other. As was standard procedure with first contact, a boarding party was sent to secure the new species, and hopefully, peacefully take them into a questioning facility. From there, an evaluation would be held regarding the eligibility of said species to join the empire of the stars. Unfortunately, the humans had a society in which boarding was synonymous with aggression. They responded likewise, killing over half of the detail sent to secure them. 57 humans were killed, and over 568 Imperial shock troopers were killed during the boarding. Such horrendous casualties would only be a precursor of what was to come. Within the day, 5 human warships had assembled in the Betelgeuse system. They were broadcasting on all frequencies for 5 hours and 30 minutes, something pertaining to the sun never setting, before 10 warships of the Imperial fleet jumped into the system. Within 10 minutes, hostilities erupted. All Imperial ships were destroyed, and all but one human ship was destroyed. The remaining human ship, Royal Flame, began to sift through the wreckage of Imperial ships, and what they found sealed the fate of quintillions of beings. Coordinates to every single system in the Empire, naval tactics, communications, and economics. Everything the Empire had at its disposal was turned against us. Upon finding such a treasure trove of information, humanity pounced upon everything they could get their hands on. Money was siphoned into nothingness, and communications were completely shut down. Our economy was all but shattered. While our empire was in the dark, our convoys and logistics vessels were ambushed and destroyed. Not only was our empire's economy on life support, but humanity was also actively nuking the plug from orbit. Humans were overzealous in their efforts, however. They were a nation of a very small number of stars. Our hundreds of thousands were not capable of being stopped for long. Our fleets regained the initiative and purged them station by station, world by world, and star by star. The war was a losing one for the humans. We were in ruins. They were turned to dust. When our fleets finally reached Earth after 50 years of fighting, they launched billions of drones, ships, munitions, and lives to stop our advance. We nearly lost everything, but they broke before our fleets did. They took down such a terrible number that our growth rate across the stars slumped by an entire order of magnitude. Whether or not humanity was justified in its war against the Empire was widely debated across the Empire. They only tried to survive after all. But at the end of the day, they had won, and to the victor go the spoils. Or so the Empire thought. When the Emperor and his entourage entered the final tomb of humanity, they were greeted by a massive hallway that descended well over 25 miles below the surface. After taking a vehicle down the hall, the entourage was greeted by a massive array of screens and supercomputers. They had entered the crypt of the human leader, Queen Elizabeth II. The screens all displayed the visage of an elderly woman standing in front of a large clock tower. She greeted the entourage with a smile and said, "Welcome to the underground section of Buckingham Palace. I hope the accommodations pertain to your liking." The Emperor was stunned. "How do you still live?" "Always have. Always will. This computer contains but a shred of my collective consciousness." "Perhaps we should travel to your palace for tea." "Tea?" The entire world seemed to rumble and come to life. Massive drives and thrusters spun up and unveiled themselves. After a matter of minutes, the entire planet entered FTL. The Emperor panicked and began to flee the underground bunker. He reached the surface just in time for Earth to come back to reality. The smog had completely cleared, replaced by a beautiful visage of Empyrean, the throne system of the Empire. Empirus, the star of the system, was dimmed by a gargantuan ring that encased it. On the surface lived over 1 quadrillion beings. The mere presence of Earth's gravity was placing an enormous strain on the structure, and security forces were already on the way. Monitors and loudspeakers began to arise from the glassed ground. "This palace is nice, but not satisfactory to a queen. Renovations are in order." The Emperor was confused. He muttered, "Reservations?" Just then, the pieces in his mind clicked and came to a shocking realization. He panicked and tried to flee to his spacecraft, but it was too late. The massive engines of the planet were racing at full speed towards the ring. Even before the impact, the ring buckled under the tremendous strength of Earth's gravity long before the collision. It shattered into billions of pieces in a glorious volley of explosions. Like a pane of glass being smashed by a guided missile, the overkill was absolute. When the first impact occurred, the computers containing the consciousness of the Queen and everyone else on Earth lifted off, content in the fact that they'd had their revenge. The ring and everyone on it, as well as the Emperor and his entourage, were destroyed. Human victory was absolute. Humanity seemingly lost everything, but in reality, just made themselves look weak to protect their true secret. Ark ships had seeded the entire uninhabited galaxy, and the human economy and industrial capacity were only growing. All of the Empire's strength was negligible compared to the human knowledge gained in the first months of the war. It would be another 1,000 years before the dust settled, humanity and the Empire resting in a turbulent peace. In those 1,000 years, countless emperors rose and fell, but the Queen still remained. Only one thing could be learned from this insane fact. The sun never truly sets on the human empire.
When our ship landed to deliver the overdue shipment of weird little space goats, I admit I was surprised when I saw what their owners looked like. Big, I'd been told. Polite as well. Even very careful about where they step. But no one had told me to expect pink elephants. I almost stopped in my tracks as I exited the ship, only jumping forward again when a shipmate's bug leg prodded my shoulder blade. I stepped quickly and did my best to stare without slowing up to the proceedings. Our small crew was bringing the cages out onto a landing pad raised off the ground, level with the average head height of the gigantic life forms whose home planet this was. They strolled by on business of their own, each with 6 legs and trunks in pairs, top and bottom. Their tails looked prehensile too, but the most striking part was the color, as bright pink as any flamingo, with flappy ears that faded to a more salmon orange with yellow edges. All they needed was polka dots to look like the most absurd hallucination this side of the Milky Way. "Hello, esteemed client," announced our captain as he led the procession toward the pink face waiting at the edge of the platform. Captain Pawcap was, I'd learned, the nephew of the captain of our sister ship, and somewhat new at this. I hoped he was waving his green tentacles at the right alien. This elephant was pretty noteworthy, actually. Its eyes had the white haze of cataract sufferers on Earth, and as we approached, it moved its ears down to show a hat of some sort. Wait, no, that a human on its head? I thought as I walked. What the heck? It was. While Captain Pawcap greeted the alien that still hadn't spoken, I took in the sight of the muscly blonde guy perched on a saddle that was clearly custom-made for this scenario. He was wearing weird little booties and had one foot raised, like he was ready to tap out a message on the alien's head. "And hello to you too," Pawcap concluded with a wave up at the human. The pink behemoth finally spoke. "Kindly do not distract my seeing eye human," it said in a deep voice. "He is working." Pawcap gave many flowery apologies, which the alien ignored in favor of inquiring about the state of its cargo. "The animals are in perfectly good health," Pawcap said, "though they did give us some trouble. I'm afraid I'll have to insist." His demands for additional money were interrupted by urgent hisses from several crewmates who knew better, and, thankfully, by the arrival of another giant pink elephant. The 2 aliens spoke in rumbles almost too low to hear. The crewmates yelled at the captain in whispers. I stood awkwardly to the side, a newcomer without much stake in any of this. "Hey," called a different voice. "Quick question." It was the human guy waving me over while his employer, owner, was busy with conversation. I trotted to the edge of the platform, careful not to lean too far. No railing. "Yes? Is there one ship like that, or 2? He asked, pointing over my shoulder at the lemon-looking thing we'd come in. "Oh, 2, I told him. "The other one looks just like it, parked over that-a-way." I pointed off to where Cam's ship was picking up a new courier job. The 2 were nearly the exact same model on the outside, though only one had corridors tall enough for me to stand comfortably. "Thank you," the guy said in clear relief. I wasn't sure I was describing it right. Glad I directed her to the right one. "Yeah, you got it," I said. I made to move back toward the crew, but he had one more thing to say. "If you're looking for a change in careers, there's plenty of demand for site assistants here," the guy said. "We work in shifts and the pay is good." "Oh, thanks," I'll keep that in mind. This wasn't the type of career I was aiming for, but it certainly was memorable. I wondered if there was a foot tap code. The second elephant said its goodbyes and moved off, leaving the seeing eye human to snap to attention and catch his employer up to speed with the surroundings. No one had moved much except for me. I sidled back to where I was supposed to be. Wiser minds had prevailed, thankfully. POCAP didn't press for extra fees, and the blind pink elephant who owned the goats didn't say anything about his conversational misstep. I was quietly shaking my head about how strange my life had gotten when POCAP got involved in moving the cages onto the waiting cart, and he bumped the controls that let all of the goats out. They immediately bounded across the platform in a wave of gleeful orange tentacle fur, kicking up their heels and knocking each other over. Their scrambling was only matched by the ship's crew going for the nets to catch them again. I chased after two of the little troublemakers who broke away from the herd to make a mad dash toward the alien elephant at the edge of the platform. I could see the human tapping urgently at the giant head, but not soon enough. One of the goats skidded to a stop while the other sprang across empty space to land beside him. He caught it, just leaned forward in his harness and snatched it up like a wayward puppy. The one that had stayed on the platform was already scampering back toward the ship. "Good catch," I called. "Hey, are they poisonous?" No one had been able to say for sure, and it seemed like an important detail right now. "Only if you're allergic to bees," the human said as he bundled the wriggling creature into his shirt. Anemone tendril fur smacked his face. "Thanks, good to know," I said. "Let me grab a cage to put that one in." I darted off while the blind elephant asked what was happening with more patience than the situation deserved. Thankfully for all involved, our ship was the only one on the platform, and the door was shut. Those frisky goatlings had nowhere to go but around in circles. Not that they minded running in circles, of course, but it was only a matter of time before the crew managed to grab them one way or another. Mostly with nets, sometimes with hands, or the equivalent, and sometimes with trash cans, or whatever else was convenient. I hauled a single occupancy cage over to the edge and got permission to climb on board the giant alien's head in order to retrieve the little critter that was trying to kick free. I almost lost it over the edge. Almost. But the client didn't need to know that. I got it in the cage and put the cage back on the cart with the rest, and that was all that mattered. The animals were none the worse for their adventure. POCAP was allergic to bees, though. "You finish up here!" he wheezed to the yellow heat seeker who was already ushering him back toward the ship with exasperation on her lizardy face. She spoke into her communicator to the crew members still on the ship. "Need a medical scan for the captain? Toxins and allergens? Quickly, please, he's... Okay, yes. Xi is carrying him in now." The gaudy purple mesmer had scooped up the captain like an octopus that needed to be tossed back into the sea. It looked like an awkward motion with his praying mantis arms, but then everything looked awkward to me and my human hands. "Our sincere apologies," said the new acting captain, coming to join me at the edge of the platform where she could address the client. "In all honesty, that spokesperson is not suited to this job. I hope his incompetence hasn't caused you undue distress." It hadn't. The large alien was more amused than anything, and willing enough to finish the transaction. Moments later, payment had been transferred and the animals were in a transport car, off to be someone else's problem. I looked around to make absolutely sure that there were no sneaky little orange faces hiding somewhere. All clear. "Farewell," rumbled the elephant. "Safe travels." It turned away from the platform slowly, leaving plenty of time for the human on its head to scan for tripping hazards and give the all clear. "Home, Jeeves." I held in a burst of laughter. Jeeves? That can't be his real name. Did the first person to be a seeing-eye human suggest that as a job title? Amazing. A cutesy little peeping noise told me the acting captain was doing her people's version of a sharp whistle for my attention. "Sorry, coming," I said. Everyone else was heading for the ship, and I brought up the rear. "Considering a job change?" she asked with a flick of her tail. "No, thank you," I said. "A noble cause, I'm sure, but it doesn't speak to me. I'd rather stay with you folks." "Good," she told me, walking faster. "You'll be useful to have on hand when we tell POCAP that we're voting him out of the captain's chair." Oh my, I managed, and I thought today was already as eventful as it was going to get. 9 ruined multi-story buildings lay on the dirt road already partially reclaimed by the surrounding landscape. On top of an 8-story one sat a lone woman in her mid-20s, brown eyes looking through the scope of her rifle at the oncoming Vanuan soldiers. Spec Ops Squad, or at least as much as Vanuans understood the concept. 12 avian humanoids in full combat gear dragging a heavy canister between them, a hose carried by the lead. Lysin gas, Vanuan speciality. Flammable as all hell, but completely inert when exposed to air. The Vanuans had invaded human space almost 30 years back, and since then they'd been locked in a stalemate with human rebellions and covert operations giving the Vanuans hell everywhere they went. But the Vanuans had numbers and tech on their side, so we'd never been able to fully chase them off as they just kept replacing their fallen and injured. The truce their governments had agreed upon a few weeks ago was tenuous at best, doomed to failure just like the last time. They all knew it, and Vanuan soldiers weren't even trying to hide their blatant disregard for their government's orders to stop attacking. This was a chance for Michelle to turn the tide, or at least get some revenge. She took aim at the canister as they came closer. Her scope had to be reflecting the light above, but if it was, then the oncoming soldiers paid no attention to it. Arrogant fools. She'd had an hour before they arrived to prepare a plan and ambush, and it would go off flawlessly. She chuckled to herself as she pictured the looks on their faces at the end of all this, before crack. The shot rang out, but the canister was punctured long before the Vanuans could react. It tore itself apart as the pressures equalized, spraying Lysin gas everywhere, creating a massive fog bank. Crack! 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 3 more shots were fired into the fog, at positions she knew they had been in when her first shot was sent. Her heads-up display informed her she had struck 2 targets. Evidently the third had moved. Her hunting trips with her father as a girl had paid off. She was considered the best shot in her boot camp for a reason. She waited impatiently as the yells of alarm and barked orders rang out. She understood a little Vanuan, enough to know they were trying to find her. She watched through her scope at the partially obscured figures below, trying to find the commander. As the fog turned to mist, she sighted the distinctive head plume and took aim. Crack! The final shot in her rifle slammed through the air and into the commander's helmet, sending them sprawling to the ground. Vanuan squads relied on their commanders. That loss would hurt them. Michelle snatched up the automatic weapon at her side as she sprinted to the edge of the building, throwing the rifle down below. She heard the shouts as it hit the ground. They would be looking in the right direction now. She vaulted off the southwest corner of the building, grabbing the zip line she had placed there before as she jammed the butt of the gun into her hip and fired at the soldiers below. She wasn't trying to hit them, though it'd be nice if she did. She was just trying to lure them. The recoil almost sent her tumbling from the zip line as she fired, but her tactic worked. The soldiers below were already running towards the building she was heading towards, and as she landed on the roof with a thud that knocked the wind out of her, she could hear them below. Vanuans were predictable. Without a commander to guide them, they'd resort to basic search tactics, and that's what she was counting on. Discarding the automatic weapon off the side of the building, she ran full tilt to the southeast corner to snatch up a semi-automatic rifle and a sidearm pistol. Jamming the pistol into its holster, she heard the telltale sounds of the doors 5 stories below being kicked in. She counted to 40 before vaulting over the side of the building again, pressing a button on her hip as she slid down the barely attached drainage pipe. Explosions tore through the building as all the charges she'd set went off one after the other. The sound was deafening, and she did her best to cover her ears and her face as dust and dirt from the shockwaves were sent through the windows next to her like miniature shrapnel. It was no good, though, and she got knocked clear near the end, falling half a full story onto the ground on her back. That'd certainly hurt tomorrow, but right now, with the adrenaline pumping through her, she barely felt a thing. She bolted across the short alleyway, diving through an open window into the next building before running through it, out another window, and into the final building before the trees. She raced to the ruined elevator, scrambling on top of the rusted heap and climbing up the cables to the third floor, where she arrived at the last of her stashes. The simple life sign detector she'd left here told her that 4 Vanuans remained, moving quickly to clear the 2-story building next door. This one was 4 stories, though, and that gave her some breathing room. She grabbed it up, strapping it to her belt for safekeeping as she waited near the elevator well, peering down below. The left elevator had long since broken apart and fallen down, dragging its engine with it, but the right one still had its cables attached and could be used to ascend easily. Michelle had a plan to make sure they wouldn't try, though. As the life sensor showed them finishing clearing the building next door and entering the lobby of this one, she threw her rifle down to the bottom of the shaft, hearing it clatter as it hit the bottom. 4 flashlights snapped around to shine into the well, and she drew her sidearm and took aim at the entrance. Fools. Such predictable fools. A Vanuan soldier poked their head into the elevator shaft and looked up, clearly trying to find her. 2 bullets to the helmet dropped them like a sack of potatoes, and shouts of alarm rang out from downstairs. Michelle barely heard them as she sprinted up 2 flights of stairs into the rooftop elevator room, where the engines were once held. As the explosion of a rigged claymore rang out below, and her life sign detector registered another one down, she clambered her way into the roof of the elevator shaft, wriggling into the far corner of the left one's housing. She could see into the room below through the open doors to the shaft, as well as a clear sight line down the whole shaft, but she herself was well hidden. She could hear the sounds of the final 2 ascending the stairs. They were moving slowly, obviously checking each door and step for traps. She'd run out with that final claymore, though, and as they encountered no resistance, their impatience began to manifest. They cleared rooms in a hurry, moved faster than they really should have been, and before long Michelle could hear them below her, preparing to break onto the roof. She idly wondered why they were bothering clearing the whole building when she'd already jumped off 2 of them. Surely they'd assume she was long gone by now. But then again, Vanuans were not known for their tactical intellect. Swarm tactics and basic concepts like clearing rooms was about the extent of it. The only thing keeping them in human space was there was just too many for the rebellions to kill. Finally, after the better part of 20 minutes, she heard them outside. She positioned herself carefully, ready to spring the final trap. The door crashed open, and they charged in looking towards the back wall. She pounced. Dropping her torso into the elevator shaft and holding on with her legs, she dangled upside down as her pistol snapped up. 4 shots, double-tapping them both in the head. They dropped down, motionless. She hauled herself back up, wriggling about to exit the crawl space she was in. As her boots slammed down near the fallen Vanuans, a foghorn ran out across the combat zone, and a voice in heavily accented Vanuan was projected by megaphones through the space. Vanuan Special Forces Team Trillium, you have been fully defeated by the human force. Please pack up your gear and return to your bunker for a debriefing and whatever disciplinary measures your government takes. One of the Vanuans was already picking themselves up, groaning and holding their head. Michelle walked over to the other one who was having a harder time of it and offered a hand to them. They took it gratefully, letting her haul them to their feet as they gave her a thumbs up in thanks. Very odd gesture coming from a non-human. She returned the gesture and clapped them on the shoulder with a goofy grin on her face. Better luck next time, mate. The Vanuan soldier made a noise like a human chuckle as she grabbed onto the elevator cable and practically flew down the intervening space to the ground floor, landing with a heavy thud. The Vanuan she'd shot at the base was sitting nearby the elevator entrance, nursing their head as a larger soldier looked on with an odd expression on their face. The larger one moved to block her path, and Michelle thought she might have a fight on her hands. It made a strange series of gestures with its talons, and Michelle recognized it as a crude interpretation of the universal sign language for good work. They must have picked it up while occupying some human world, and adapted it to the Vanuan's 3 taloned hands. She tried not to think of how they extracted that sort of information as she gestured, "Thanks, you almost got me a few times there," in return. The big Vanuan made a laughing sound, almost like birdsong from the forest back home, and moved aside to let her exit. As she made her way towards the exit of the training area, she looked up the metal walls surrounding the artificial forest and held a thumbs-up sign high above her head. A figure far above on a platform returned the gesture as her squad mates appeared from the forest's edge to congratulate her on her victory, talking about each move she made and declaring she'd earned a few pints tonight. The figure turned to face the Vanuan general next to him as he lowered his arm. The general was gripping onto the railing with a force that threatened to break the metal rod. For the entire time the combat had gone on, the general had been staring at the screens protruding out of the base that had shown his soldiers' points of view. The human man spoke in slow but certain Vanuan. "General, this is why the stalemate has gone on for so long. This girl was fresh out of boot camp not 2 weeks ago, and look what she did to a squad of your best soldiers with naught but some common supplies and an hour to prepare. You cannot beat us, but we cannot beat you. Let's end this war before even more lives are wasted in this ceaseless conflict." The general just walked off towards their entourage, leaving to debrief their defeated men and talk to their government, all the while muttering about loss projections. A month later, the Vanuans came to the humans' government with a peace treaty, and so far this peace has never been broken. Every incoming Vanuan counselor is made to watch the video from that day, to know what a single determined human can do, and to ensure the peace between their nations continues. The changelings were universally hated. This was perfectly logical. A leech-like parasite species that survives by puppeteering the body of its host is something any sapient capable of dreaming would have nightmares about. It didn't help that the process of acquiring a host was a rather brutal affair that involved invading the victim's brain case and lobotomizing them so as to integrate with their nervous system. Throw in the final fact that, while they weren't technically sapient themselves, they were more than capable of suborning a sapient host's brain to think for them. And it's easy to see why eradicating the parasitic abominations from the galaxy became a priority item for most species upon learning of their existence. All of which is why Shell was now on the run. Her current host, a bulky, four-armed Corthinian soldier, had been one of those who had come armed with flamethrowers to destroy her community, a tiny village the changelings had established for themselves on a remote island near Corthinia's tropical equator. The elders had prepared her for this eventuality. They had told her practically every day of her life that their village would one day be discovered, and they would be driven from Corthinia for the crimes of their kind. She had followed their orders and tried to make peace with that inevitability. It hadn't helped. Perhaps nothing could have helped, considering the sheer unadulterated trauma of returning to their isolated village after playing on the border of the forest and the beach all morning, only to find it on fire. A hellscape of pained screams, dark smoke, and the sickening smell of roasted meat coming from the charred hosts of people she grew up with. She shook her current host's head, desperately trying to banish the terrible memories from her mind. It wasn't fair, she thought bitterly. Sure, there were horrible rumors about other groups of changelings, rogues, who tormented and tortured the innocent species of the galaxy, moving from host to host and racking up a significant body count as they did so. But it wasn't like her people were in the habit of doing that. The elders had strict rules, only allowing the villagers to reproduce when a new host body was conceived to an existing one. Among her people, taking a new host outside the womb was taboo. Prior to inhabiting this soldier in self-defense, Shell had never once changed bodies in all the years she'd been alive. Now, though, things were different. Now she was one of the rogues, whether she wanted to be or not. She had fallen in with the military squad as they prepared to leave, then given them the slip once they reached the mainland and stowed away on this shuttle to the interstellar public transport void train, hiding among the passengers, anxiously hoping against hope. None of them would notice the small, telltale signs of a body being consciously, rather than subconsciously controlled. It hadn't been a problem with the soldiers, what with the armored full-body hazard suits they wore, but she'd been forced to ditch the suit and weapons upon reaching civilization. She would probably have to learn to use weapons if she wanted to survive for long in the wider galaxy, but for now at least such things would only draw unwanted attention. The shuttle docked with the public void train, and she quietly made her way through customs, trying not to let the fear she was feeling show on her host's face. She needn't have worried. Some species were extremely sensitive to even the subtlest signs of a changeling among them, but the Corthinians weren't one of those. Flashing her host's military ID with a few grunts of affirmation to the cursory questions was all it took to gain passage in the void train's relatively crowded economy section. And just like that, she was on her way to somewhere else. Anywhere else. It didn't matter at this point. Her original host was gone. Her old life was over. She took one of the public access seats and tried desperately to hold back tears as the terrible weight of grief and guilt she'd been holding back for days began to overwhelm her. "Hey mate, anyone sitting here?" Shell composed herself enough to wave the stranger permission to sit next to her, avoiding looking at him as the information light came on, and a friendly synthetic voice was broadcast through the entire economy section. "Welcome aboard the Orion Arm Public Access Trans-Stellar Void Lane. Please mind your luggage and remain respectful of fellow passengers. This void train is traveling express from Corthinia to Earth. Thank you for traversing the void with us." Earth? Why did that name sound familiar? One of the elders had mentioned it once. It was a pretty famous home world. She remembered that much, but for which species? Shell couldn't remember. Mate, are you okay? You're crying. Shell glanced at the stranger sitting next to her, regarding her with an expression of concern. She recognized him instantly, or at least his species, from the descriptions her elders had provided, and her host's lymph fluid froze solid in dread. A gaunt biped with overly long, gangly arms and bare, artificially adorned skin, her species' worst enemy, human. Never, never go to Earth under any circumstances. That's the human's homeworld. Other species are fine to be around. So long as they don't look at you too closely, they won't notice anything. But humans see right through us. It doesn't matter the host. It doesn't matter if you move or not. Humans know. They always know. One glance is all it takes. Shell stared in utter, helpless horror as she saw a momentary flash of uneasiness in the human's eyes, followed by recognition and a lowering of his brows. Sure enough, he knew. The elders were right. He saw right through her and knew she was a monster pretending to be a man. "Sorry, I need to use the bathroom," she said, far too quickly, as she jumped to her host's feet and attempted to slip past him. It didn't work, as she knew it wouldn't. The human's arm shot out far faster than should be possible for such a lanky appendage and grasped onto her wrist with terrifying force. Shell was trapped. It was a lesser-known fact about changelings that they were incredibly weak relative to their hosts. Conscious muscle control was simply incapable of exerting nearly as much pressure as subconscious control could. Despite her current host being many times larger and stronger than her previous one had been, she still had zero chance of escaping the human's grip. All the man had to do was hang on until the authorities arrived, and he had more than enough strength for that. "Take a seat," the human ordered in a low, deadly serious tone. She could practically feel the anger and disgust radiating from him. Shell tugged in vain once before sagging in surrender and doing as he said. So, this was how she died. The human would turn her in to either the Corthinian or the Earthling government, and they would dispose of her. She was terrified, but also somehow relieved, as the last of her hope was snuffed out, and she sunk back into her seat. The stress that the worst might happen faded away. Now it had happened, and the only path left was to accept it. Maybe she could see her parents again. The human was still studying her face with a severe expression. After a long wait, he opened his mouth to speak. "How long have you had this look?" the human asked, with a slight upward nod. He didn't need to be specific. They both knew what he was referring to, what he was asking. 3 days, she admitted reluctantly, looking away from the piercing gaze that saw straight through her, past the host, all the way to the thing inside. The human narrowed his eyes. 3 days since she killed this man? I thought so. Your lot don't usually join the military, he muttered under his breath, glaring at the rank signifier on her shoulder carapace. Shell didn't even know which rank the symbol stood for. So why then? Why did you do it? Why'd you murder him? Tears sprang to her host's eyes despite Shell's best efforts to keep them down as the horrific memories came flooding back into her mind. Being dragged into her home by her head, being kicked to the floor next to the corpse of her father. Her mother begging, pleading, not for her own life but for Shell's. The soldier's sadistic laughter as he turned the flamethrower on her mom. The terrible screams that went on far too long. The terrible radiative heat. The smell. And then there was a flash of movement, of subconscious action, and she was on him, instincts guiding her for perhaps the first time in her life, grabbing some sharp thing, maybe his knife, she didn't remember, to cut a hole in his face mask. A look of fear in the soldier's one visible eye as she opened her young host's mouth wider than Corthinian mouths were meant to open. A sense of release. A horrible, terrifying moment of exposed, naked vulnerability, pain, blood, fear. And then her old host fell away, and she was sinking her mental fangs into the man's hideous mind. He killed my mummy and daddy, she confessed, the tears flowing freely as she broke down entirely under the weight of guilt and fear. He was going to kill me too. I didn't want to. No more words came out, just incoherent sobs and tears. She had been such an idiot, thinking she could do this. It had been obvious from the start that a stupid, sheltered girl like her could never settle into life as a rogue. She didn't even know why she'd tried. It would have been better if she'd just given up. Slowly she became aware of arms around her as she cried. The human was hugging her, patting her on the back. That wasn't right. She pulled away, and to her surprise, the human allowed her to do so. Your mummy and daddy, the human echoed her words back to her, his face unreadable. How old are you? Shell hesitated, unsure how to respond, or why he'd even care how old a monster like her was. Eventually she settled on the truth. 7.5. The man looked away, a shadow of empathetic pain falling across his face as he looked away, suddenly finding it difficult to maintain eye contact. Just a kid. I see. Look, I'm sorry for being mean just now. You don't look your age, the human said with a nervous laugh and a pained smile. He paused, looking Shell's current host up and down. I heard the Corthinian government found a group of your kind on the outskirts, that they were taking care of it. I guess I never really thought about what that meant. Shell stared at him, confused as much by his words as by the flash of guilt that passed across his face. Inside her, the tiny spark of hope she thought he had extinguished appeared once again. Was it really possible he, a human of all creatures, might not turn her in? Why are you going to Earth? He asked, looking back up to her. I'm sorry, I didn't know where it was going, Shell admitted, the stress returning full force as she suddenly became desperate beyond all measure to cling to that spark of hope. I just hopped on the first train. I'll get on a different transport. Go somewhere else. I won't hurt anyone, I promise. Just please don't turn me in. The human stared at her, then shook his head vehemently. No, absolutely not. She stared, sagging slightly, but the hope stayed alive. The man's tone and his compassionate expression didn't match his words. He reached out and put a gentle hand on her shoulder carapace. My name's Jack. Come to Earth with me. I'm sure my wife would love to meet you. Shell stared, not entirely comprehending exactly what the human, Jack, meant by those words. But a rush of emotions flooded through her as the spark of hope brightened. She wasn't out of the darkness, not even close. But that spark, perhaps it could be the lantern she needed to light her way. 8 years later. Shell, dear, dinner's ready. Coming, Mom. Shell stood up, brushing sandy blonde hair out of her green eyes and grinning as she ran back to the house with the boundless energy of a pre-teen. She'd been told the color combination was rare among natural-born humans, but she didn't care. It reminded her of innocent times, of playing so long ago in the place where the forest bordered the beach. Growing a new human host for Shell had not been cheap, But Jack had been more than willing to pay for it even before the Earth government stepped up to cover the cost. The social workers and scientists assigned to her case had been determined to grow something that was not just usable, but that functioned effectively alongside her physiology. Relearning how to walk and talk as an entirely new species had been difficult at first, until she realized that they'd somehow adjusted this host's subconscious mind to work with her instead of against her. All she had to do was learn to trust the host and just allow it to take care of the involuntary stuff, which was more difficult than it sounded, but so worth it. It took away some of the detached feeling and made her feel integrated, like she was her body and not just the thing piloting it. A weird, soft, lanky body, admittedly, but humans couldn't help the way they were made. Human diplomats had insisted they return the corpse of the Corthinian soldier as soon as they could. Jack had been mad enough to just throw it in an unmarked grave as he learned more of Shell's story. But that would have only exacerbated the diplomatic tensions between Earth and Corthinia, which were already at a record high thanks to the human public's unexpected outrage at the Changeling massacre, and the Corthinian government's adamant refusal to relinquish the extradition order for Chell, accusing her of war crimes. Human diplomats had attempted to point out that only combatants could be guilty of war crimes, to which the Corthinians countered that changelings were combatants by definition. Discussions broke down after the humans refused to accept such a, as their ambassador put it, convenient excuse for genocide, and imposed economic sanctions on those in power. Jack was leaning against the threshold with a smile and a hard screen in his hand as she approached. Calling his wife Lucy Mum had come naturally to Shell, but she couldn't bring herself to call Jack Dad, much to the man's chagrin. He still hadn't realized the impact introducing himself by name at the single most pivotal moment of her life had had. She'd never admit it to him, but Jack meant so more to her than Dad ever could. "Got a letter for you, kiddo," he said, brandishing the hard screen. She held out her hand for it, but he pulled back, holding it out of reach. "After dinner. Don't worry, I'm pretty sure it's good news." "Oh?" she asked curiously, but he grinned and shook his head. "Not gonna spoil the surprise, first dinner, and before that we've got to talk about your grades again." Shell winced, trying to brush past him to get to the dinner table, but was stopped when he put one of his arms in front of her. Even after all these years and becoming human herself, the reach on those things still sometimes freaked Shell out. "But Jack!" she groaned, rolling her eyes as she turned back to him. "No buts, young lady. You might look 7, but we both know you're not." Jack's serious expression broke for a moment, and he grinned at her. "You're 15.5, right?" "I'm still passing, though," Shell said sulkily, refusing to make eye contact. If she had one regret, it was adding the "and a half" way back when she'd first told him her age. To this day, Jack never missed an opportunity to tease her about it. "You're doing the bare minimum because you're bored, and we both know it," he said, his tone towing the line between strict and sympathetic. "You know you can always move up few years if it's too easy." "No," Shell said emphatically. "No, I don't want to leave my friends behind." And she paused. There was also the other thing, the one she hoped didn't need to be said. Jack had signed up for higher learning after returning from his tours abroad, and had graduated to become a first school teacher around the time she was entering Earth's schooling system herself. He was now working at the very same school she was attending. Being known as the teacher's kid was embarrassing, but, well, she didn't want to skip these years. She just didn't. Shell noticed her host's subconscious was causing her to fidget with her hands. Weird. She considered telling it to stop, but decided the behavior was harmless enough and allowed it to continue. "I don't want to move up. I'll do better, Jack, I promise." "All right then, kiddo. Above average from now on, got it?" he said, poking her cheek with an index finger. "Fine," she said, rolling her eyes again and receiving a grin and an affectionate punch to her shoulder as she pushed past him. After an excellent dinner of spaghetti bolognese, during which both Jack and Shell once again cheerfully admonished Lucy for not pursuing a career as a chef, Lucy nodded to Jack with a smile, who brought out his hard screen with the letter on it she'd seen before and handed it to Shell. Cautiously, she examined the official-looking graphic on the first page. Why on earth was the government contacting her directly? Most of the official stuff related to diplomacy with the Corthinians and her living situation had been settled years back, and it had always gone through her parents anyway. She swiped to the body of the letter and started reading. She hadn't gotten a few sentences in before she realized what this was about. She looked up at Jack and Lucy, her green eyes wide. They agreed? They're really going to fund it? Jack nodded, grinning. They're setting up a whole new department for it and everything. Apparently they've already found 3 villages, and if you're willing, they'd like your help when they're ready to start making contact. Only if you're willing, though. No pressure. The Changeling Outreach Effort. A charitable humanitarian endeavor to carefully find and quietly approach isolated populations of changelings, doing their best to live by moral standards, without giving them away to the local authorities, and assist them in relocating to Earth. This would allow humanity to provide them the protection they needed to live safely, the technology they needed to live ethically, and the acceptance they needed to live prosperously. Shell swallowed, her wide eyes swimming in tears at the enormity of what was being put together. Because of Jack, and because of her. Of course she'd help. Of course she would. Long ago, Shell's elders had told her to fear humans, and to stay far, far away from them. Warned her that a human would be able to see right through her, see past the host, to what she really was. They would never know how right they'd been.
God King Tualaman, divine emperor of the glorious Golden Horde and the most powerful being in the galaxy, struggled against his restraints. The indignity was worse than the pain. To be kidnapped by a lowly pirate was absolutely unthinkable. He had once ordered planets destroyed and species exterminated on a whim. Trillions of beings, dozens of species worshipped him as a deity. He was supposed to be untouchable. There will be a reckoning for this, human, he bellowed through swollen lips, orange blood spraying across the room.
Big guns and bigger guns!
Big guns and bigger guns. guns and bigger guns.
and bigger guns. I gotta rip it up, I gotta rip it up, I gotta rip that down, I'll get in my way. I gotta rip it up, I gotta rip it up. Rev up for doomsday.
Money.
Boots down, travel in the temple. Break through and prostrate the freak. Hellbound, dice and disassemble. Beat down the beast. Keep coming and hit the ground running. Give me the mayhem. Keep coming and never stop gunning. Live just to stay. Straight down into hell I run. Big guns and bigger guns. My God, what is never done. Big guns and bigger guns. I gotta rip it up, I gotta rip it up, I gotta run that down, I got in my way. I gotta rip it up, I gotta rip it up. Rev up for doomsday. Load up, load up, boots down, hell out. Rage and fury fill my head. Creeping, moving, red. Straight down into hell I run. Big guns and bigger guns. My die work is never done. Big guns and bigger guns. Hold down that trigger, son. Big guns and bigger guns. My work is never done. Big guns and bigger guns. I'm gonna rip it up, I'm gonna rip it up, I gotta rip that down, I'll get in my way. I'm gonna rip it up, I'm gonna rip it up. Rev up for doomsday. Big guns and bigger guns. Now listen closely. Here's a little lesson in trickery. This is going down in history. If you wanna be a villain number one, you have to chase a superhero on the run. Just follow the moves and sneak around. Be careful not to make a sound. Shh. Don't touch that.
Well, that was dumb. So it won't let me go into the concealment area to my looking. But it will let me go into the concealment. Sorry, that's stupid. That was recent.
Now listen closely. Here's a little lesson in trickery. This is going down in history. If you wanna be a villain #1, you have to chase a superhero on the run.
First off, my camera was
Just
down.
follow my moves and sneak around. Be careful not to make a sound. No, don't touch that.
Why would you do that? Stupid on my part, but it's still stupid.
Now look at this net that I just found. When I say go, be ready to throw. Go! Throw it at him, not me! Oh, let's try something else. Now watch and learn. Here's the deal. You slip and slide on this banana peel. What are you doing? Now listen closely. Here's a little lesson in trickery. This is going down in history. If you wanna be a villain #1, you have to chase a superhero on the run. Just follow my moves and sneak around. Be careful not to make a sound. No, don't touch that. Now look at this net that I just found. When I say go, be ready to throw. Go! Throw it at him, not me! Oh, let's try something else. Now watch and learn. Here's the deal. You slip and slide on this banana peel. What are you doing?
born in